Hi there. Today I'm going to talk about a book which is a martial arts biography. Um, it's about a chap who went to Japan in 1962, originally to continue his study in judo at the world headquarters, the Kodokan, and then moved on to study karate. And it's this book, Moving Zen, by CW Nicoll. So, as I say, he originally was involved in judo, and then he went along to the JKA headquarters, in their old headquarters, and he met Mr. Takagi, who was the general secretary, who told him about the training and enrolled him. And then eventually he stopped doing judo because he didn't think it was wise to try to fully pursue two separate martial arts, and he was more interested in continuing with the Shotokan karate. And in fact, he was living at the Kodokan at the time, but he devoted all his training time at the JKA. One of the instructors that he mentions quite a bit is Onoda Sensei, who at the time was a fourth dan, and this was before he had won the All Japan Championships. And he was a very strict instructor, but he took a particular interest in the foreigners because he was learning English at the time. Onoda Sensei later came to England, and he was resident in Liverpool at the Red Triangle, and that's where I trained with him. Because I first did Shotokan before going on to Goju. Mr. Nicoll goes quite a bit into the training, the progression right through, learning the kata and so on. And he also talks quite a bit about Makiwara training, which he got heavily involved in, although I don't think the JKA emphasized it very much. And he describes it. Once he started, he built his own Makiwara, and he said, over the following months, I directed millions of foot-pounds of energy at this target. The canvas became flecked and mottled with blood when I punched poorly and grazed my knuckles. I used the Makiwara every day. It was, and still is, a deeply personal fight. Nobody could watch me and see my little victories and defeats. Later on, towards the end of the book, he talks about behind our house. My Makiwara was weathered now, and the straw pads had been replaced several times. How many hundreds of hours? Certainly my hands had weapon nature now, and certainly I used the Makiwara as much as ever, yet strangely, the ugly calluses were beginning to disappear. Perhaps I had learned to strike the board correctly without losing energy in friction between the straw and the skin. I believed that the continual pounding and tempering of my limbs had passed the stages of pain and tissue damage, and had begun to be a tempering of mind forces. In essence, he says that at first the Makiwara changed him and calloused his hands and made his hands bloody. But then eventually he changed the Makiwara. He changed the surface of it and started having an impact on the Makiwara. So it was a two-way process. So it's quite interesting. I didn't really do much Makiwara training until I got into Goju, and then we did a lot. It was a very important training device. Another instructor that he mentions is Kanazawa Sensei, who was my first Japanese instructor. And he did quite a few private lessons with Kanazawa Sensei, who helped him a great deal. He learned an awful lot from him. He was obviously a fantastic instructor, one of the best of his generation, or one in a generation type instructor. He met Don Draeger late Don Drager, at the Kodokan. He was an instructor there, and Don invited him to live with a group of gaijin, the foreigner martial artists, at a big house in Ichigaya that Don had. And there were judo guys there, there were guys who were doing jiu-jitsu, the stick, etc. And so Mr. Nicoll moved in there, and he describes that aspect very, very well. And Don is obviously a towering influence in the martial arts in Japan at the time. He talks about the Japanese culture, um, what it's like to be a foreigner training in Japan, um, the food, um, the crowds, etc. He marries a Japanese girl. They move to a small village not far from Tokyo and integrate into the family there, into village life and so on. It's very, very nice, very touching book on that way. And to be frank, I wish I'd read it before I went to Japan. It would have been a really, really good um, uh, precursor to my going over there. Uh, it's a book which I've read many, many times. I've always enjoyed it, and anyone who's interested in what it was like training uh, in Japan in the martial arts, it's particularly for a gaijin, it's probably the best one there is. And again, it's a book I recommend.